Over on Jammergator 8, a new college football video is out. In this video, we talk about a bowl game that was proposed in the 1980s that would have been played in South Carolina, and why the NCAA decided not to go ahead with it for no good reason. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And now, on with our feature presentation. December 24th, 1978. It's Christmas Eve, and we have a wildcard game taking place in the NFC between the Atlanta Falcons and the Philadelphia Eagles. It's the very first time that the Falcons ever made it to the postseason. All the pain that they suffered over their first decade in franchise history, from their 1972 collapse, where they lost the NFC West after losing their final two games of the season, to their collapse in 1973, where they lost two of their final three games to miss the playoffs following an 8-3 start, to their 1967 season where they won just one game, to their 1977 season where they allowed just 9.2 points per game thanks to the grit splits defense, yet still missed the playoffs because their offense was that inept, to every other season in between. At long last, the Falcons were playoff bound, and had a shot to make it to the Super Bowl. What followed was a legendary game that etched itself in the history of the NFL as one of the most iconic wildcard games ever played, and quite possibly, the greatest moment in Atlanta Falcons history. You can argue a few plays for the greatest moment in the history of the team, including Billy White Shoes Johnson and his controversial Hail Mary catch against the San Francisco 49ers in 1983, to Morten Andersen's game-winning 38-yard field goal at the 1998 NFC Championship to send the Falcons to their first Super Bowl in franchise history, to Michael Vick's iconic 46-yard touchdown run in overtime to beat the Minnesota Vikings in 2002. However, for a lot of people, they'd say that it was this play right here, when with under 2 minutes left and trailing 13-7, on third down, Steve Bartkowski hit Wallace Francis for a 37-yard touchdown pass, which eventually won the game for the Falcons by a final score of 14-13. It was a thrilling game, and for a team making their debut in the postseason, it was a heck of an introduction. To trail 13-0 entering the final quarter, then score the final 14 points and win your first playoff game ever? It doesn't get much better than that. And for the crowd of 49,447 fans in attendance that day at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, it was a moment that was a long time coming, and that they would remember for the rest of their lives. The whole city of Atlanta was celebrating Christmas in style, I'll put it that way. However, just the fact that anyone in the stadium was able to see the game in itself is remarkable. Odds are, you know about what happened on the field with the Falcons-Eagles game, the crazy finish, and what this moment meant to the Falcons and to the city of Atlanta. But what you might not know about is what happened before the game, because buying tickets for this game was such a nightmare that the scene at the stadium was nothing short of chaotic. Fans were getting injured in the madness and were almost dying, and fans were staying away in the aftermath, almost causing the biggest game in franchise history at the time to get blacked out locally. It was that much of a mess. Because this is the story behind one of the biggest ticketing disasters in the history of the wildcard round, and in the over 50-plus year history of the Atlanta Falcons franchise. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand the day before this all went down. Entering the final week of the season, the Atlanta Falcons, with their 9-6 record with wins in 7 of their last 9 games, were right in the thick of things to make the playoffs for the first time ever, as this was the first year of the expanded field, where 5 teams in each conference now made it into the postseason instead of 4. There were 2 things that, for the purposes of our story, concerned the Falcons. Number 1, would they make the playoffs? And number 2, if so, would they host the wildcard game 1 week later, since the Los Angeles Rams had locked up the NFC West by that point? Well, part 1 of the equation was made relatively easy. Entering the final week, all the Falcons needed to make the playoffs was for Washington to lose their game to the Chicago Bears on Saturday, December 16th, since that would put Washington at 8-8. And due to tiebreakers, even though other teams could knock the Falcons down to the number 5 seed, there was no scenario where they would be eliminated otherwise. And sure enough, on that Saturday, Chicago defeated Washington by a final score of 14-10, meaning that the day before the Falcons even played their final game of the season, they knew that they were in the playoffs. but the job wasn't done. Making the playoffs is nice and all, but what's even nicer is being able to host a playoff game, and get that home field advantage to play in front of your fans for the first round, and to not have to travel. For the Falcons to host, they needed one of two things to happen. Either the Falcons had to take care of business against the St. Louis Cardinals, who, despite their 0-8 record under new head coach Bud Wilkinson to start the season off, had played surprisingly well over the second half of the season, going 5-2 in their 7 most recent games, or they had to hope that either the 8-6-1 Green Bay Packers or the 8-6-1 Minnesota Vikings lost their game. They just needed one of those teams to lose, and not both. Because even though Minnesota or Green Bay would have had a better record than the Falcons with a win, by default, one of them would be slotted into the playoffs as the NFC Central champion, bypassing wildcard weekend, since the fate of that division had not been decided yet. As you can probably tell, the bad news for the Falcons is that they got absolutely curb stomped by the Cardinals. This game was not even close. They lost the game 42-21, and played absolutely terribly in the process, turning the ball over 6 times, allowing Cardinals quarterback Jim Hart to throw for 333 yards and 3 touchdowns, and getting nothing going on the ground, picking up just 41 yards on 2.3 yards per carry. The good news? In the end, the game meant absolutely nothing, because even though they needed either the Packers or Vikings to lose, both of them wound up losing and doing the Falcons a favor, with the Vikings losing 27-20 to the Raiders in a game where they trailed 21-0 at the end of the first quarter, and the Packers losing 31-14 to the Rams, in a game where the Rams never trailed at any point. And with that, the party was on. Not only were the Falcons in the playoffs, but they would be hosting the wildcard game against the Philadelphia Eagles on Christmas Eve. Tickets for this game were going to go on sale at 9 a.m. on Monday, December 18th, and they were expected to go like hotcakes, and understandably so, considering the circumstances and considering how long people had waited for this very moment. So what time did people start lining up outside of Atlanta Fulton County Stadium? They lined up before 5:30 p.m. that Sunday. As one fan said, "We left Fort Valley, which is 120 miles south of Atlanta, at halftime when we heard Minnesota was behind 14-0. We got here around 5:30, and a few people were already here. I haven't seen a Falcons game in 2 years, but this trip is worth it." Keep in mind that when they made the trip, they had no idea whether or not the Vikings would even lose the game. It was 14-0 in the first quarter. This man, by the way, was Alan Willingham, a pecan grower, and if he was alive for Super Bowl 51, I'm dying to hear what his thoughts were, considering that was a 28-3 lead late in the third quarter that the Falcons blew, and he thought a 14-0 lead midway through the first quarter was completely safe. Regardless, the gamble paid off, and as the result became official, fans began lining up outside the stadium, ready to be among the first to buy tickets. And the atmosphere, from all indications during the night, was extremely festive and joyous. While there are no videos, there's this photo taken when the crowd was just a few hundred people. Even though the overnight temperatures were in the 20s, that didn't matter to these fans, especially because some people came prepared, bringing an oil can fire, bringing food and alcohol, bringing sleeping bags and blankets, and bringing a radio. Plus, it doesn't matter how cold it is, you've waited over a decade to make the playoffs, it doesn't matter what the weather is, you're going to be there. Everything was good as we drew closer and closer to the tickets officially going on sale. And then, 9 a.m. hit. And that's when everything completely fell apart. With that, let's take a closer look at the photo again that was taken at night. So this was taken well before the vast majority of people were coming to the stadium to buy tickets for this game. You can see that there are 5 ticket windows where you can buy tickets. And look at the positioning of the crowd. There is absolutely no line whatsoever. It's just a mob of people. While reports say that it started off as 5 orderly lines, as more people got there, the line just became a mob, with people extending past the ticket booth in both directions, meaning that eventually, they would have to converge into the middle. And you can even see right here what looks to be a fence or some sort of barricade right by the booth, where all the fans that were outside the barrier have to get inside of. And I'm sure that you can see where this is going. Because what happens when you combine an organization that had never hosted a playoff game before and had no idea how to do this, with a bunch of excited and eager fans who wanted to get good seats and were scared that the game would sell out, with poor planning when it came to the space, including a mob scene with a line that wrapped around the entire stadium, with drunk people who were also tired since they couldn't get any sleep, and with people who were in a large crowd but had to wear layers upon layers because they were in 20-degree weather overnight, meaning that they were freezing and sweating at the same time. You get an absolute disaster that made buying tickets to the Falcons game one of the most dangerous things that you could do. Reporters described the scene as a stampede, where there was no sense of order, and where any semblance of a line whatsoever collapsed entirely into a surge of thousands of bodies. As one fan by the name of Steve DeBartolomeo described the scene, the crowd was terrible. It was just a pack of humanity pressed up against the stadium. Reports indicated that there were over 18,000 people there that day to buy tickets, so it was substantially more than the crowd that was there overnight in the picture, hours upon hours before tickets were being sold. So you can imagine how bad this got. And it wasn't just disorderly. It was almost deadly. There were several reports of people being unable to breathe and being trapped, and reports of people screaming for help because they were being crushed, but to no avail. In the scariest and most notable of the scenes, one unidentified woman was crushed in the stampede and fainted, becoming unconscious. Fortunately, she was with friends who were able to help her to some extent, but that involved, quite literally, dragging her body on the ground through the mob, taking over 10 minutes to escape. From all accounts, the woman survived, but it took a long time for anyone to help, as those 10 minutes felt like an eternity. Security was absolutely worthless. It got so bad, with so many people panicking and pushing and shoving, that at one point, people in line acted as their own vigilante security guards, and formed a human barrier to prevent anyone from crashing the gate and making matters worse. Said Ambro Martinez, who was in line waiting to buy tickets, "I am very disappointed that this was so disorganized. You think that after 13 years waiting to get to the playoffs, that the Falcons would be ready for something like this. Obviously, they didn't know what to expect. The game better be worth all of this." Everything about this scene was disorderly and dangerous, and it got so bad that the game was dangerously close to not being televised and not selling out. What do I mean by that? Well, NFL rules dictated at the time that any game, whether it's a regular season or a postseason game, has to be sold out within 72 hours of kickoff, with some exceptions here and there. Usually, this isn't an issue for the playoffs, and it shouldn't be an issue at all for the Falcons, right? It's their first playoff game ever. The city is buzzing, and thousands upon thousands of fans came to the stadium as soon as tickets became available to buy them, worried that they were going to be sold out and go quickly. Heck, fans started showing up hours before they even went on sale. However, what should have been an easy sellout was not, because fans saw the stories, watched the videos on the news, and heard from experience from peers that were there, and they were so deterred from buying tickets, not wanting to risk being in a possible stampede and be caught in the madness, that they just stopped buying tickets. There were 18,000 people in the stampede who bought tickets. After the first wave, just 500 more people bought tickets. They stayed away. The first Falcons playoff game ever was a big deal, but it wasn't worth being caught in a stampede and risking your life to do it. Now, the game ended up selling out eventually, but they cut it awfully close to the mandatory league-imposed deadline, and they only have themselves and their disorganization, which almost turned deadly, to blame. Fortunately, the game itself was a classic that is still remembered 45 years later as one of the greatest wins in the history of the Atlanta Falcons, and no one got severely hurt from this, so this is kind of an afterthought compared to what happened on the field. But it was still an absolute disaster no matter how you want to slice it. It wasn't the first time there was a stampede and fighting to get tickets to a playoff game, and it wasn't the last time, as if you want to learn more about the time that this happened in the 1996 AFC Championship between the New England Patriots and the Jacksonville Jaguars up in Foxborough, click the card in the upper right corner. But even though the Falcons made a great first impression on the field when it came to their playoff performance, off the field, with the execution of these ticket sales, it was anything but that. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.